New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is the Dalai Lama, my friend, with my guest, Robert Thurman, who has been a close friend of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, for 60 years. Robert Thurman is Professor Emeritus at Columbia University, where he taught for about 60 years as a teaching professor in Indo-Tibetan Buddhist studies. He is a leading worldwide lecturer on Tibetan Buddhism, a skilled translator of Tibetan Sanskrit Buddhist literature, and passionate activist for the plight of the Tibetan people. He was a Tibetan Buddhist monk for a short time and became a Tibetan Buddhist lay teacher. He is co-founder and president of the Tibet House, U.S. Menla, a cultural center in service of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the people of Tibet. He is also host of the Bob Thurman podcast, Buddhas Have More Fun. He is author of many books, including Wisdom is Bliss, 4 Friendly Fun Facts That Can Change Your Life, and his translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Liberation Through Understanding in the Between. He is co-author of Man of Peace, the illustrated life story of the Dalai Lama of Tibet, and Love Your Enemies, How to Break the Anger Habit and Be a Whole Lot Happier. This is Bob's third interview with New Thinking Aloud. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. He's joining us from the New York area. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Bob. It is a great joy to have you back with me on New Thinking Aloud today.
Thank you, Emmy. It's so nice to be with you.
We have had 3 conversations on New Thinking Aloud, actually 2 interviews and a live stream. The first one was Wisdom is Bliss, based on your great new book, Liberation Between Death and Rebirth, on your translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And then we did a live stream with Jeffrey Mishlove on the Noble Truths, and I'll link to those interviews in the upper right corner of the screen. Today we're going to talk about your amazing friendship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. To get us started, could you share who he is and how you two met?
Right. Thank you. Sure. Well, it's kind of auspicious to do that in this year, which is a wood dragon year in the Tibetan calendar. And those, the combination of the element and the animal, there's 12 animals and 5 elements. So every 60 years, you get a repeat year with the same element and the same animal. And that's the year, last one was 1964 from 2024. And that's when I first met him. So we've been friends for 60 years. And when we started, we were really very much friends. I was introduced to him by my original teacher, the wonderful, who I mentioned for a purpose, Geshe Wangyal, who was Mongolian actually, but had lived in Tibet for 35 years and was a great master of all the Tibetan teachings. And I met him in New Jersey. It was kind of funny. I went all the way to India looking for a guru during my senior year at Harvard, dropping out temporarily, taking leave of absence. And then I met him in New Jersey, 1.5 hours bus ride from Port Authority in New York City. I only visited there during an intermission of my India trip, thinking to go back in a week or so. And then he was just so amazing that I stayed and studied with him for 1.5 years. So then he introduced me to the Dalai Lama on the basis that the Dalai Lama might make me a monk, which I really wanted to be at that time. I had been studying for a couple of years, but I was desperate to be a real Tibetan Buddhist monk with a robe and the whole thing. And although there were no such things in those days in New York City or in the United States, but I was determined to do it. So he got tired of telling me that it wouldn't work out in the long run, although he knew I was sincere. So then he said, well, I'll introduce you to Dalai Lama. I have to go to India anyway, and maybe he will decide to do that. And then when he introduced me, he said he wants to be a monk, and he said nice things about me to the Dalai Lama because and that I already spoke Tibetan. That was already an amazing thing for His Holiness. And but then he said he wants to be a monk. But my advice is don't make him a monk. He then says to the Dalai Lama. So then I was like, what? You said you were going to introduce me to be a monk. Now you're saying don't do it. And then he said, well, that's my opinion because I'm an old monk, old man. But he's the Dalai Lama, so he will decide. And so then I was calmed down about it. And then Dalai Lama invited me to be with him in Dharamsala, and we were there for a couple of years. And we were sort of buddies because he was still studying himself in his 20s, and he's a little older, 6 years older. But we were still both in our 20s. And so when I would ask him spiritual questions, he would more or less refer me to his own teachers. And he and I would argue and debate, and then he would ask me a lot of things because I'm sort of the second Western person after a German mountain climber called Heinrich Harrer, who was in Tibet in the 50s. And I was the second Western person who was fluent in Tibetan. Already I learned Tibetan very quickly from my teachers in New Jersey. And so he would ask me about Freud and about the U.S. Constitution and Thomas Jefferson and Einstein and physics and chemistry, whatever. I was an English major, so I was not so helpful on the lab stuff, in science. But philosophically, I was up to date in the West, and therefore we had a wonderful relationship. We had a lot of fun. And he liked it, I think, because other people, the Tibetans, and he had not met too many Westerners at that time, but Tibetans and also Indians who he knew, Western, non-Tibetans, were very deferential to him. And, oh, yes, sir, Your Holiness, and this and that. And I was not so deferential, although I was, of course, respectful, but I was going to be a fanatic monk, and the slightest infringement of monk etiquette, I was like all up in arms about. I was really silly, actually, and but he loved it, and his secretaries were less happy because they would have a schedule. He had to meet this person, that person. Then once he would meet me, we would have tea, and he would cancel the other things, and we would talk about this and that because he was so excited about what we were talking about. And that pattern continued forever, and then he did make me a monk, actually. And I was so gung-ho about it. And then I was back in the States for a while because of visa issues and things. I was memorizing a way to pass my monk exams to become like the equivalent of a PhD in that very, very much a learning system that they have. It's not just a praying system, it's really a learning system. And my old teacher began to tease me a little bit, like, do you know anybody who wants a white monk right now among the Tibetans or the Mongolians? And the Americans, do they want a Buddhist monk, American? And he would kind of provoke questions like that. And then, of course, this was the middle, 66, 65, 6, middle of the war protest movement, civil rights movement. Peers of mine at Harvard who had graduated by then were down in the South registering voters, risking life and limb. There was a lot of action in the mid-60s. And I wanted to go and support them. And then I was forbidden doing that because I was a monk. And so you can't do that and be in the monastery. You have to stay here, and et cetera. And as it turned out, then I began to realize gradually his wisdom. And I was unable to be a monk. And then because my destiny, so to speak, was to be here in New York, and do something for the United States and for the world. That's why I was reborn here. And by that time I had begun to remember a little bit about previous lives in Tibet and Mongolia, why I had such a powerful affinity for it. And I had a few, but I didn't know exactly who it was, but I was beginning to remember stuff. And So, of course, his argument had a very strong force for me. If I just wanted to be a Tibetan monk, I could have been reborn in the Tibet among the Tibetan exiles. I couldn't be reborn in Tibet because the communists had shut things down. The Chinese communists, by that time, they had shut down the religion, which they do. But I could have been among the exile community, like where Dalai Lama was. I could have been reborn there, and I would have been born down the street from him. But I obviously came here on a mission. I began to doubt that. And finally, by mid or late 66, I was aware that, gee, I have to figure out some way of continuing what I love, which is studying, learning, translating, meditating, almost living that kind of a life, and yet have an American livelihood and be a contributing member of America. And then I realized, better go back to school, and then I could become a professor in the topic of Tibetan Buddhism, or religion in more general, or philosophy in more general, however it would shake out. And then I could still keep studying lifelong, and I would teach as my livelihood. And that was fine with me. The idea in the Western Academy that you don't proselytize, and that would be better, And that was also, but it was so enthusiastic. It was a little bit of a self-restraint I had to practice once I did start teaching. But by that time, I'd been a graduate student for 3 or 4 years, and I was a very quick graduate student. It only took me a couple of years to do finish the BA, MA, and PhD in about 3 or 4 years. And so I was by that time quite well able to do it, and I never sent anybody to any guru. And when they would ask me about it, because students would get excited about things to learn, and I would say, well, just learn it as learning, and I'm not recommending any guru. I don't do that. And but I'll give you a rule of thumb. If you meet a teacher in any form of any kind, when they are willing to answer your questions and be with you, and also welcome you going to other teachers, that person's probably okay. If you meet someone who says, like, don't study anything else, you found me, stay here, who's forming a cult or something, then say, thank you so much, goodbye. That's the most I would ever do about any student, and to try to help them not to fall into any cults of any kind. And then I taught for almost 60 or 55 years, and it's a wonderful job, actually. It's young minds and people understanding new things, and also overcoming. And sometimes people would come to me who were already very, I would call it, say, fundamentalist about Buddhism or about Hinduism or about some Christianity, Judaism, whatever it was. And then they would begin to look at their own tradition. I also taught comparative religion. I taught even the Western religions. I taught all the other Asian religions. I taught shamanistic type of things about them, because it is about in academia, because you definitely don't. The only thing you can proselytize in academia is what the scientists proselytize, which is the high church, since academia is the high church of materialism, And so they do proselytize that you have to believe that religions are just sort of like psychiatry or something. They make you feel better, but they're not realistic. And they know what reality is. And so they're the ones who are allowed to proselytize and to preach, the religion of meaninglessness, the religion of nothing after death, the religion of no soul, and even no mind, just the brain, doing things. That's their religion. And that, unfortunately, is the religion of modernity, not just America, but the modern world. And very unfortunately, But anyway, I learned that too. And actually, I had one really great friend named Peter Berger, who has passed away since then, in my whole academic time, who was a very famous sociologist of knowledge, what they call sociology of knowledge, and also sociologist of religion. And he wrote very famous books that religion studies professors love his work and so on. Following upon, he's really the greatest sociologist, probably following upon Max Weber and Emil Durkheim, the German and French sociologists of religion, who are the most famous in religious studies. And he was originally Jewish from Austria, but then had converted to Lutheranism himself. But he was very interested in the Eastern religions. And we really had very strong meeting of the minds about the nature of, and we even wanted to retitle religious studies programs in American universities as nomology, and call it the science of nomology. Nomos meaning the norms and the sort of the reality views that control people's worldviews, in different societies. But we, of course, we never succeeded in changing any name because that would have put the materialists into the category of promoting a religious type ideology that you sort of have to believe in if you're going to be a normal citizen of a modern society. And kind of like an orthodoxy, like an inquisition they have, and scientism. Actually, the great Houston Smith, who was a wonderful comparative religion scholar, originally from MIT, and then he moved to Rochester, I think, and then he wrote many books on world religions. And he used to call what the scientists advocate scientism. And that caught on pretty well, but of course not with them, but otherwise it did catch on. And I think that's really very good. Now, back to Dalai Lama. He was, at that time, just sort of a regular young Buddhist, learning his own stuff. And then I had a gap of about 3 years from 66 to 71, when I didn't see him. And actually, I tried to correspond with him, but I didn't get response. Mm. And he was a little upset because I was his first Western monk, and I had to resign as a monk by mail because my old Mongolian teacher wouldn't accept my resignation because he said he always advised against it because he knew the West, and he knew what I was doing here better than I did. And the Dalai Lama hadn't really traveled in the West at that time, so he was still in a cocoon of the Tibetan culture in exile in a certain way. And in Tibetan culture, becoming a monk is not a sacrifice. It's a privilege, and it's an honor, and it's a wonderful lifestyle, because the culture is all built around those people who do not engage in the household life, as they call it, doesn't have to deal with government, taxes, military service, if male, religious service, family, etc., and then therefore can focus all their life energy on spiritual cultivation. And their society completely supports you with that. And furthermore, Protestants don't understand this about monasticism, but a good monk, not one who's just sort of repressing themselves, but a good monk who diverts and sublimates their libido, you could say in psychological terms, into their visionary life. Into spiritual life, angels and the divine and love toward all beings, kind of thing, and and restraining the sort of normal sort of sexual outlets, let's say, of the married life or of the bachelor's life, actually feel very well and have available that energy. And they're very, I don't know if you know any elderly monks or nuns who are really sincere and have understand it that way, and are not just holding themselves back and feeling subconsciously resentful about it, which unfortunately a lot of them do, even in Tibetan ones. But the ones who are able to sublimate like that, they're extremely happy, cheerful people. Their skin is always very marvelous, and they're very healthy. They live long lives. It's quite fine, contrary to the secular idea that, you got to have sex or you're going to drop dead or something, mentally unhealthy and crazed, and so on, which is a Protestant attitude about Catholics, actually, monks and nuns, because Protestants basically don't do it. There's a few small schools that have some sort of celibate people, but otherwise ministers, married ministers, and so on. And they assume, of course, there is a bad history of criminal sexual behavior by priests, but the mainstream monastic people don't do that. They really are very good in self-restraint, the great majority of them, either Christian or Buddhist. And actually, Christians and Buddhists are the most strong celibate orders among those two religions. The Muslims, who are the third universalist religion, they don't do that. They're holy men, they're mullahs or they're Sufis, often are usually expected to be married and so on, and families and things. So they don't have that kind of self-restraint thing that the Buddhist and Christian monks and nuns do. Unfortunately, we don't understand that, but it is very valuable. But Protestant ethnic-based societies like our industrial society doesn't understand that.
Since we're on the topic, I have heard of Catholic priests, for example, this could be in any religious or spiritual practice, sometimes share about feeling lonely or wanting that human companionship or touch or so forth. So I just wonder, and maybe that's because only certain people are maybe cut out to be at that spiritual level, or is it maybe that they could use more guidance, or maybe they're meant to have a family?
Well, partially, but I think also it's partially also modernity. There's a difference between a Catholic celibate priest who lives in a lay community as a minister kind of to a flock and doesn't really meet that many other priests except occasionally for tea or something. But they're living surrounded, and they have television in their room, and they're surrounded by the completely self-indulgent materialist culture where immediate pleasure is the norm. Grabbing immediate pleasure is the norm. So it's very hard for them to do the sort of self-cultivation contemplative level where you can sort of sublimate the libido in a contemplative way there, because they're constantly dealing with lay people. And it's very different, I think, when they actually really live in a monastery or nunnery where they're really, really with companions. And there they do have very strong companionship and friendliness and so on. And they're able to restrain themselves. And actually, the nuns are more skillful and better, and very often in Catholic universities, hospitals, all the wonderful social institutions they have. The nuns have a very low record of any kind of abuse. It's the males who do, even though even in Buddhist monastic communities, there's this false blaming of the females as being more lustful than the males. But actually, it isn't the case. In fact, it's just a patriarchal a meme that the female is worse or is sort of less self-controlled than the male. But the male is definitely more guilty.
There's a bit of projection going on there.
That's proven in the Catholic orders by the much better record of the nuns than the monks, actually, or the priests who are not exactly monks because they don't live in a monastery. They're out there in a church, in a lay community, surrounded by a completely wrong kind of signals, and therefore that they lose control in different settings is not surprising. So probably the Catholic in the future in reform, I don't expect Francis to listen to that, although I think he's a little inclined in that way, and certainly I'm sure the others won't. But they really could make a difference between monks who live in a monastic setting, and they meet lay people, but when they do, the lay people are coming into their setting, and it's much more controlled what they look at and think about, and their companionship. And those who have to live in the middle of a lay community to minister to them, they should probably be allowed to have families, and that they'd be better off, and they would be much less of this kind of terrible stories that we hear, these exposés that are coming out. And there's a certain amount of that in the Buddhist movement also, not only in Tibetan, but in other traditions, but much less, I think. But there is some of that. And some of the lamas have caused disgrace, a handful of the many who have been around the world since their exile. There's been 3 or 4 bad scandal cases that we know of. But there are probably more that are unscandaled that should be. Maybe another handful, probably double that amount. But it isn't huge, in other words. But it's something we have to try to police, for sure.
Definitely.
Dalai Lama says, go to the press to students. He says, because there's sort of a thing of like, once you have a guru, it's a big sin to turn against the guru, even if they seem to do something wrong. So there's a lot of that kind of thing for very advanced level people. But Dalai Lama contradicts that, and he says, go to the press if someone's being abusive. They should not use the teacher relationship to domineer over their students, either financially or sexually or in any way. Cultically, absolutely not. And but students are scared to do it, so usually they wait, and then there's a blow up. They humble themselves, and they take it too long, and then they flip out.
Yeah. For you, though, you were a monk, and that must have been, tell us about that moment in your life where you you become good friends with the Dalai Lama. He made you a monk. And then you made this decision to return to Western culture.
Yes.
What was happening?
Yes, well, during that period, I was very lucky in that some months after I had realized that I was not going to manage as a monk, it was not my mission in life, and I had to be a regular lay person, and I had to go back to school and become a professor. So I luckily met an amazing person who happened to be a woman who happened to be my age. I had been married as a teenager, actually. I was a teen bridegroom and had a child even, and had a happy time at that time doing that. But before I went to college, or when I was just starting in college. And I still had friendship with that person and still connected to that child somewhat. It was a little bit awkward. But anyway, then I met another person who actually became like another teacher for me. And I consider her my third big guru, actually, of all my gurus. And she was Swedish, part German, part Swedish, and she'd grown up in Sweden, actually, and in very strange childhood, and had been a model. And everyone was shocked that we got together because the ex-monk and the ex-model was not exactly what they thought were two people with similar backgrounds. And I didn't have time to sort of talk to Dalai Lama about that decision and the fact that I did fall in love with someone. And she's very clear. Whenever I tell a story, I have to be very clear that I didn't meet her when I was a monk. I only met her after I had resigned, because she doesn't want to be blamed, which, people might otherwise do that. And so I told the Dalai Lama, there's only that. But anyway, I then met him with her, and by that time we had 2 kids because we were both in our mid-20s, and it was time she was very much wanting to have them. I wanted to have them. And I saw them actually as part of my mission, inviting new beings from higher planes and higher worlds to help lift us out of this materialism disease that we're stuck, the virus of materialism, that the whole planet is destroying itself by being stuck in. And so magical children we had too. And then I got to the point in my PhD, having gone back to Harvard, I finished my BA, got into a program, a PhD program, finished all the coursework and was working on the dissertation and arranged to do research with the Dalai Lama back in India. So then I met him, and then this time his monk is there with a wife and 2 kids. And I was very nervous about it because I knew he had been a little annoyed with me, and also his senior teacher, who was my spiritual teacher more at that point, because he'd been the one I'd actually asked all the spiritual questions to. Although Dalai Lama ritually ordained me, but that was the one who had taught me. He was more annoyed even, I think, than the Dalai Lama. And I was so nervous to meet him. And then a very miraculous thing happened. It was really marvelous, which was when I finally got to there was a long delay about the visa because of Nixon and Mrs. Gandhi were having battles, and Bangladesh was going on, and the Russia-China war. I mean, it was a really tough time, 70, 71. And but then we finally got to Delhi. And then when I was in Delhi before getting up to Dharamsala, I heard that the senior teacher, the Ling Rinpoche was his name, who was Dalai Lama's most important teacher, was in Delhi, and he would be presiding over a ceremony for the Tibetans in a certain temple. And so I said, I got to go there, and that's how I'll meet him. And then I will introduce everyone to him, the family, and I will beg his forgiveness and blah, blah, blah. And, whatever, and hope for the best, And so we go there, and it's very crowded because he's such an important teacher Lama among the Tibetan. And it's literally wall-to-wall people. And we got early, so we had our seat with the 2 kids, one nursing baby who was actually Uma, and one older boy who was 3 years old. And he, of course, ran away, which he always did. His name was Ganden, he had a Tibetan name. And anyway, he ran away, and he was stepping over people. And they were muttering, where's that English boy, that American boy? Why are his parents getting him? But I couldn't chase him because I would have to walk on people, a big person, He actually went up on the altar of this big temple And he was running around among these stacks of cookies and cakes and fruits, it was like a big puja, like a ritual, a ceremony. And wandered around, and some monk was trying to get him down, but he wouldn't listen at all. And the monk couldn't climb up there, and he was wandering around there. And then the Lama came at the end, and it was so crowded, they made his seat conducting the ritual in the middle of the aisle, the central aisle, in front of the central image, which was a giant statue of the great Tibetan saint and teacher Tsongkhapa, who was considered almost like a Buddha by the Tibetans, and which had a spotlight on and so on in this big temple. And Gandham was lurking behind that statue by that time, so not listening to the monk who was telling him to get down. So just when he gets set and his ritual objects and his bell is in front of him, the senior Lama, and sort of looks up to think about starting, my little son, who had not been in Tibetan communities, we'd been at Harvard, graduate student, etc., walks around, stands in front of that statue with these golden curls coming down on his shoulders because we couldn't bear cutting his hair. He was so cute. And puts his hands together in a perfect salutation for the Tibetans, where you don't put your hand flat. You cup them like this, because you're holding the jewel of compassion between them. It's a sort of Tibetan custom. And does that perfectly, although he had not seen anybody doing that. And then he bows with a huge smile to that Lama. And there's a hushed thing of all the Tibetans who were grumbling about him. And there's total hush. And the light is on that. And it was like a supernatural experience. I was like, oh, what? I was so nervous, about it at the time. And my wife was calmly nursing his baby, but she was fine. And then that Lama, after this magic moment, he goes, come, like this, waves his hand to the little boy, Gandham, and he obediently climbs right down, comes right over to him, which he had been refusing the other monk. And then the Lama tells his attendant something, who then grabs a bunch of the offering, cookies and cakes and candies, which usually at the end you distribute, as a blessing to the audience. And he takes a whole handfuls of them, and then he gives them to this kid, who he makes him hold out his shirt like that, make a little satchel, fills it up with these things, and then he goes running back to us over some poor Tibetans who are sitting there walking because they were so clamped together. And look what I got! So anyway, I didn't know if that would cause more trouble, so I was more nervous the whole ceremony. So then at the end of the ceremony, I had to fight my way through the adoring crowd who wanted to get a hand blessing, or a touch on the head from the Lama as he's leaving. But I only worked my way to there, and he's out on the front step of the temple by that time. He's just getting into his car, but his attendant is standing on the stair who was helping him go down the stair. So I say to the attendant, oh, please tell Rinpoche that I'm here. Alexander, they called me. They didn't call me Bob. The Tibetans never really liked the word Bob for some reason. They called me one of my middle names. Okay. I said, Alexander, and I need to see him, and I'm and he, Rinpoche himself, the Lama, he turns around before sitting down. He's sort of standing at one foot in the car. He turns like that. He looks up at me, recognizing my voice after 3 years, more than 3 years. And he says, that's your kid, isn't it? He says, that kid is yours, right? In Tibetan, he says. He says like that. And I said, yes. So I'm about to get a scold of the life, I think. And then he says, bring him to see me tomorrow. I want to meet him. And
oh, how beautiful.
He was so excited about him. He felt there was something very auspicious. So the children eased my way.
Yeah.
When I met Dalai Lama a week or two later, when I got up to Dharamsala, and when I met His Holiness for the first time with the family, again, the first time in 4 years. And I was also very nervous, even though it went very well with the senior Ling Rinpoche. That was calming. But anyway, I was again nervous meeting Dalai Lama again with the family. And then he's greeting and being very polite to me, and then my wife and looking at the kids and everything. But, I have him in the biography of him that I did, the Man of Peace book. I have him at a distance when he sees me in the stage, a little bit of staging. I said, "Oh, here's my monk. Oh, here comes my monk. What? Who's that with him?" Wife and children,
That was His Holiness the Dalai Lama with your son.
Yes, but then what happened there? So there's a little tension. But then again, Gandhan leaps into his lap to hug him and knocks his glasses off by accident. The Dalai Lama wears glasses. And then they go flying across the room. And then the secretaries are scrambling to get them and so on. And Dalai Lama's laughing madly and hugging him.
Oh.
And so it totally broke the ice, and then he realized that I'm now a family layman, and he, that's fine. And then he gave a big blessing to us as a couple, and subsequently he became very fond of my wife, and he found that he used to tease me that she seems more devoted and more enlightened than you, and much better at not losing her temper, I'm sure, and blah, blah, blah. They had a very good relationship up to that. But, the children sort of saved me in both cases, in a way. I mean, it probably would have been all right in any case, but those are kind of cute stories about the Dalai Lama. And then we started going right back into our happy relationship for a year there, where I was doing thesis research. And I did a whole bunch of interviews with him for a book and so on. But at that time, 1971, it wasn't a big deal in the West, and people didn't know him. He hadn't traveled here or anything. And Nixon and Kissinger were blocking his visas after that because they wanted to, as you know, they wanted to make this. They did make this alliance with China, and Nixon wanted to have a big visit there in his early part of his second, before he had to resign. And they were making alliance against Russia. And so they didn't want to agitate the Chinese in any way by being nice to the Dalai Lama. So they actually also exerted themselves to block his visas in Europe and Japan and wherever he wanted, Australia, wherever he wanted to go. He was kind of imprisoned during the 70s as far as being on a global stage, which was very bad for him because he had escaped into exile after trying to deal with Mao for 8 years. And finally realizing Mao was kind of hopeless, and then Mao probably... Or actually, Deng Xiaoping was the one in charge of trying to swallow Tibet. China to swallow Tibet, which they never had owned, in fact, in the past. But and the famous later, who was the later premier right after Mao died, Deng Xiaoping, and so he had escaped, so he could speak up about the Tibetan genocide, really, or cultural genocide at least, if not actual genocide, And so it was very much, but it was good in a way because during the 70s, he really cultivated and meditated and really, realized his own teaching, not just very intellectually, but personally, I think. And I noticed a huge change in him from that year when we were still buddies of the 70s. And I was doing PhD research, and he and I were working on books on things, different things, and translating his books and so on. And he was working out his teachings in English and things. So we had a wonderful year, and it was marvelous, and I had a great time. But still, I was looking to the older ones as my teachers in a way, and we were more like colleagues, and friends. And then there was another gap in our relationship from 72 to 79, the longer one even, because he couldn't come to the West. I was a young professor, very much month-to-month paycheck, small paycheck, and children going to school, and family expense was really a credit card debt. I mean, it was hard, and I couldn't just jaunt off to India. It's not possible. I'll have to do 3 jobs if possible, or whatever, And but then when I met him again in 79, after I got tenure at Amherst and was able to go, and then he also was first able to come to the U.S., he had increased in stature. He was like our mutual teachers. He had become like them. I mean, he had that level of sort of personal charisma and depth of ability to understand whatever complicated subject and topic, and also with all sorts of new ideas that were amazing. And then this is the great idea is that I most wanted to talk about and talk about him today, where he revised his view of Buddhism to say that Buddhism can take you all the way to the best that a human being can be. I believe, he said, although I don't pretend that I did. He has a humility of a really enlightened person, of not claiming to be really enlightened. And so he revised his view of Buddhism by saying that I no longer think that you need the teachings of Buddhism only to become enlightened. I have met Thomas Merton. I have met saints in Christianity. I have met Jewish tzaddik, saints. I have met Hindu saints. I believe that all of the great teachings that have lasted for humanity, not sort of necessarily fly-by-night cults, but all the great teachings by the great founders can take you the whole way if you really do the whole thing. Whether you believe in a personal creator God, or whether you believe in many gods, or whether you believe in a divine force that isn't a person, whatever it is that you believe, isn't only, you maybe think it's all people, actually, rather than any particular one. But whatever it is, if you do it, go to the fullest extent of it, I believe now that you can attain it. And so therefore, I respect the other world religions as if they were my own. And I respect others' right to stay with them, and I have no desire to convert other people to my religion, which I do like. I'm not saying I don't like mine. I'm just revising its philosophy to say that we're not the exclusive only one. And I am beginning to put out a request, which actually in the long run, I think he's put it out to 3 popes, but not Francis yet, because Francis and he haven't met yet, because he's not traveling as much as he did. And also since Francis first got in, Pope Francis has been negotiating with China to try to get a better deal for the Chinese Catholics, which are the number of millions. So he didn't, his advisors told him, you better not meet Dalai Lama, because then the Chinese will not negotiate with you and so on. So they haven't met. Which is too bad, because they're very kindred spirits, I feel. I really think they would love it. They do love each other. They know each other in a way, remotely. But they would also enjoy meeting. But anyway, the 3 previous popes, he asked them, and also he's told Hindu Shankaracharyas, the equivalent of the highest sort of level in Hinduism. He's told rabbis, head rabbis from Jerusalem and other ones. He's told muftis of the Islam, and Protestant ministers, and anyone he could find, also Baha'i and other more recent ones, Sikhism, the head of the Sikhs. He's requested all of them. He says in the modern period, he thinks that it is we should revise our theologies, revise our worldviews, and we should be open to let's say, if you believe in an omnipotent God, God is allowed to have other religions. And you don't have to convert everybody to you. So we don't have to compete for market share. And we can cooperate on a truly mutually respectful level to try to deal with the religion of scientism. He doesn't put it that way because he's more polite than me. But the religion of materialism, which says there's no soul and no future life, and no one has to worry about the consequences of their action past whatever, jail or not jail in this life, or some punishment in this life. There'll be no future punishment because you don't exist as a soul. So there'll be no future life. And Buddhism has a theory of no self, but that doesn't mean no soul, actually. That's another very big innovation of him in the way that people understand in the West, Buddhism. Because they do have a no self teaching, which only means no fixed self. That even the soul itself changes. It's affected by whether you do good or ill. It suffers. It's what takes you to suffer in hellish kind of condition. If you create hell around you by conquering people, by destroying things, by being hateful and so forth to others, then you create hell, and you'll live there. In other words, the soul will change. So that's what the no self means. It means that even the subtle level, so what they call super subtle level of the mind, which is what they call the soul is not just a fixed thing where someone is just always Bob. I'm always Bob. whatever, in heaven or hell, I'm Bob. Same Bob is there. No, that's ridiculous. You could change your name in a court. I could be Joe. I would still have the same process, because we know with the body, we see it growing old or growing stronger or weaker or healthier or sicker. We see that it's not a fixed thing. It's a process. And the spiritual thing is also a process. The spirit is in process. The mind is in process. The spirit is the more subtle level of mind in the way that Buddha understands it. So it's a selfless soul, in other words, just like we are selfless selves, not just Florence Nightingale, all of us, and also not just Jack the Ripper, who probably was a nice guy with his grandma before something traumatized him and he became vicious to people, and killed them, So that's that. People are and the greatness actually in that view of human being fits in a way with the scientists, in the good side of the scientists, which is their open-mindedness. Their dogma about materialism is the bad side of them. That's their scientism. But the good side of them is the method of observing, always finding a new perspective, a deeper insight, a further development, and open their mind to something that is beyond their theory, and then revising that theory to have a better, more sophisticated, more complex one. But unfortunately, they are driven by the idea that there's going to be a final theory, that then they'll have control of everything from their ego, which of course is obviously not happening. Since now they discovered that there's 10 times more matter and 10 times more energy in the universe that they haven't seen yet. Dark matter and dark energy. So the bright matter and bright energy which they see is only 1/10 of the matter and energy of the universe. So that means they don't know what's going on, actually. So they better be open-minded, But that hasn't really sunk in with the guys working in the lab trying to make a new drug or a new bomb or whatever they're making.
Well, they're very focused on the external world, and your lineage and the Dalai Lama's lineage seems to be very much about consciousness and the inner world.
Yes, well, first they have to take responsibility for their own worldview, that in a way it has a dogmatic element about it, that we're not going to look at anything that isn't matter. But now there's many things that they can't see, that they know are there, but are not at least what they think of as matter. And the quantum thing was helpful, but the most helpful has been this dark matter and dark energy, because they're at black holes and things. And now there are some good ones I like who are into white holes, or the post-black hole situation, that's of course more logical. It's of course impossible. Their big problem has to do with they have deified. They're doing idolatry about nothingness. They think nothingness is the big final paradise that they're going to. It's kind of a neutral paradise. They feel very ascetical about it because there's no pleasure in it, but there's no pain. That's the key point for them. It makes them feel secure that they'll be anesthetized for eternity just by dying. And of course, that's very bad teaching the young. And we have this epidemic of suicide among the young. Nowadays, the 18 to 25-year-olds is a huge, terrible statistic, because they're being taught by these scientists as if it was a discovery, which it isn't. It's just a dogma. But they're teach as if it was reality, and as if they knew it was reality, which nobody has ever met nothing, and therefore nobody will ever know it, because you don't. You can become unconscious, but that didn't destroy the world. When you become unconscious. So, in fact. But they teach it to them, and that their life is therefore meaningless in the final analysis, and that's mature to accept that it's meaningless, and so on, all kinds of stupid things, which make people feel there's an easy solution when they're deeply upset, which is just bang, and then they're not going to have a problem. And that's wrong. They're going to have a problem. Although, I think, again, Catholic theory should be open-minded, and although probably people will have a hell of a headache who shoot themselves in the brain. So I agree with that. But that they'll be condemned there forever is a sadistic and stupid idea. There's no forever about any relative state. Everything is a process. You can always find a Tylenol, which is love. And some loving being will help you get out of hell. For example, Jesus, let's take for example. How is he going to accept beings forever in hell? It's a completely wrong piece of theology, totally. It is made up now. What goes wrong? What has gone wrong in the religions? Now, this is not Dalai Lama's theory. This is more sociology. But what I believe it is that the great scriptures of the Jesuses, the Moseses, the Krishna, the Yajnavalkyas, the Hinduism, Shankaracharyas, the Buddhas, the Lao Tzu, all of the great ones, they are mostly usually oral people, and other people write it down, and then other people collect it. And then the people collected, the first layer of them are usually very devoted and very sincere about it and very open-minded, because they become students of the great people. But then there is a controller of the society that they live in. Like there's the caliph, the early caliphs in the 7th century for the Islam. There's the Roman emperors when Christianity becomes the orthodoxy of Rome. There's these different Indian emperors and Chinese emperors. And they want to make sure that whatever the theology is, that the emperor has a divine right to boss people around. So if they want to make God look like a super emperor who's going to punish you badly if you don't obey, so you'll obey the worldly emperor. And they generally terrorize their citizens, and they enlist the high priest to help them do it. Mm-hmm. And therefore they contravene the original, just open your heart, you don't, it's not a following a rule. It's like being here with the flower in the field, like readiness is all, it's all right. Jesus is kind of wonderful parables, and Buddha, same, and all of them. Love is the answer, and you can understand that. You can meet God. You can be with him. God loves you. God is love, etc. All this sort of thing. And actually, they make God look like a pain in the neck, like a nasty emperor who's going to put you forever somewhere if you don't do what they say. And this has happened worldwide. And it didn't matter too much, because the good thing about it was ethics and the 10 Commandments and this sort of thing, when you had cultures where everybody was the same belief. But the modern world, New York City, every religion you could even think of is 2 blocks away from every other one. And if they're ready to go to blows, like Sarajevo was. Sarajevo had a synagogue, a mosque, and different kinds of Christian churches all in one block in Sarajevo. Because when Ferdinand and Isabella kicked out the Jews out of Spain, a lot of them went to the Ottoman Empire, and they had good jobs with the Ottoman, with the Turks. They were very sensible. So that a lot of them were in Sarajevo, and there were a lot of the world traditions were there. And then this was stirred up, but they were not necessarily always fighting each other. In fact, they were very much getting together. So human beings, have an ability to get along with and love their neighbors, and the gods and the spiritual teachers have always told them to do so. And yet, the great danger in a nuclear, materialist, climate-destroying world is that people will use these religions to dominate other people, and to think of them as lesser, kill them even, have a religion, have more crusades, What Putin is doing today, with his pretense that he has a former KGB official as our patriarch of Moscow. I happen to know the archpatriarch of Eastern Orthodoxy, who lives in Istanbul, and who wails in lament privately about the behavior of that Russian one, who won't listen to him, and who eggs Putin on in his conquering plan to conquer the world, causing so much death and destruction, killing civilians at a huge pace, that he's been doing, and trying to encourage others to do so, And that's really a kind of demonic thing, actually. But pretense is, it's like the old Tsar, and we're all so religious, We're these white Christian Eastern Orthodox people, and the Orthodox patriarch is all behind me, and it's onward Christian Russian soldiers, And that's really very dangerous, as we can see. It's causing terrible damage. And at a time, and that kind of causing thing, Pakistanis have nuclear bombs. It's not a big freak out that the Iranians might get one. The Pakistan is a religious state. It's a Muslim state. Pak means pure, Pakistan, pure country, pure Muslim country, that means. So it's, again, enacting that older, more more closed and exclusivist form of religion, using it to send out soldiers and conquer other people who you can then proclaim are lesser than you because they don't have share your worldview. Mm-hmm. And that's there the Dalai Lama, my friend, the Dalai Lama, has, I think, really someone everyone has to listen to. I really think so. And I think Francis gets it, actually, personally. For example, Pope Francis. I don't know how much he's able to enact at his age and the whole thing. I do think he gets it. And I think that that the Shankaracharyas in India kind of get it. Mm-hmm. And I really hope Modi will get it. He's been so far, his base is very like that, what's called the RSS. They're the people who killed Gandhi because he wanted to have the Muslims be equal citizens with the Hindus, and they still behave like that, and that's Modi's base, unfortunately. But I think he can be better than his base, but he's trying to. We'll see what happens. Yeah. And the communists in China also are fundamentalists in another way about their state and about they're having also a new emperor now. When he went beyond Xi Jinping, when he went beyond the thing about the 2 terms for a president, and then many committee kind of being the one that runs things, the Politburo, And when he did that, then he started to put himself in the emperor position. And once he does that, then he's going to need to have heaven behind him, He has to be enacting the will of heaven. That's the final propaganda thing in Chinese culture. It'll turn religious, believe me. It won't be Buddhism, which came from India, even though Chinese liked it as a whole, They're not such conformist people as the Western people wrongly think. Chinese are very individualistic also and very nice people, wonderful people. And he himself is wonderful, but now he's got this virus, And I think really the key person there is Putin on the planet. He's the one, I read a really nice article in the New Yorker about the problems we're having now about not dealing with the climate and how the right-wingers in the different countries are ignoring the oil industry, and they're letting them do whatever they want, because they're trying to take political power. And one of the reasons that they're doing it is immigrants bothering people. And he was referring especially to Italy, and the right-wing fascists now in Italy are the dominant party. They're a minority party, but they're dominant. Meloni, but she's the good fascist, supposedly, in Italy. Marine Le Pen in France, the Brexit thing in England, which ruined England, actually. And even right in Sweden is now a right-wing government. And because these immigrants, but who has shipped them all the immigrants? Putin. He destroyed Syria. Did you notice? He started with Grozny in Chechnya. He completely flattened an entire city after Yeltsin, and that's how he got. He then pumped up that kind of, we're the Russians, we can destroy anybody. In Russia, he did like imperialist thing, in an imperialist form, saying Stalin wasn't imperialist enough. He said, and Lenin, he's going to do more, and he's fomenting this. North Korea is perfect for him, and Iran, and all intolerant versions of religion. And the religion is necessary for this ultimately, because to do it, you have to have people who are willing to give their lives. And then religion supposedly is going to take care of them afterwards. So the religions are, if they are, scientism at least, it's only nothingness. And nothingness will take care of you too, but it will just be boring. It's because you won't exist. You won't suffer anyway, no hell. So it's another way of trying to pretend that they can take care of you after death by the scientists, the materialists. But the point is that in mainstream people need something like a god to do it. Or even they have forms of Buddha that are like that will bring you to heaven no matter how sinful you are. And when people get very fanatic about that, and then that connects to a state, and only the people who believe that way are good and everybody else deserves death, then the planet will be destroyed. It's not just democracy we're looking at now. We're looking at the whole planet. Look at that flood, that double hurricane in the south. And that's just the start. That's not, the fires in California, fires in Canada, like in the Arctic and Russia. It's like there's no end to it. And the oil people, all of those wars are fueled by gas-burning planes and trains and tanks and troop carriers and what have you, rockets, it's all petroleum, all of it.
Right. It seems that
the message of the Dalai Lama and what you've been advocating for with the Tibetan people and your lineage is really the message of love and compassion and acceptance of everyone, where when you talk about these dominant world leaders or any leaders, whether it's science or people who run a country, it can be very self-serving. So what is the Dalai Lama, or what have you learned from him that can help us to move forward in positive directions?
Right. Well, what I think we can learn is we can train AI to really give people, like, for example, Putin himself, or everybody, even the most devilish person, has a good side in the Buddhist point of view. And Putin, I had a long-term fantasy of having a paradise island for ex-dictators. And in a way, I would say Ronald Reagan did that very nicely. When Marcos in the Philippines was wanting to kill the yellow flower people, Mrs. Aquino and others, and Imelda and him wanted to buy more shoes or whatever they wanted, and they wanted to do them in, Reagan said no, and he brought them to Hawaii. He sent several planes to take them to Hawaii. What he didn't do was what I would do, which is I would arrange massage therapists, I would arrange spiritual teachers, I would arrange Hindu kahunas, Christian priests, Muslim Sufis, whatever it takes, whatever they like, and lots of fashion and more shoes if that helped, and whatever it is.
As long as they're eco-sustainable products.
The people who get so traumatized that they feel they can't trust others, and then they dress it up with the whole thing about conquering, and then we'll be happy when we've destroyed everything, which will not work, and they don't get happy, actually. And actually, ultimately, they fail because nobody else wants to be destroyed. And, like my son Gandhi, that one who did the miracle for me in 1970, he put it this way: Hitler, for example, took over this beautiful country, Germany, where they had really great whipped cream kugels and wonderful pastries and chocolate cakes and Beethoven and Mozart and what have you, scientists and fantastic people, Goethe and playwrights and poets, Rilke and artists, And in 13 years, he flattened the entire country and he did himself in. That's like 3 presidential administrations, basically, and 1 more year. 13 years, 1932 to 1945. And the entire Germany was flattened. Not even to mention how many other people outside of Germany and so forth he saw that occurred, the death of, in other countries. But I'm just saying, even his own country, who put him there thinking, oh, he'll help us. He's a strong man. Oh, he's ready to make us the superior and blah, blah, because they were all traumatized by World War I, by the silly Kaiser. But my point is that it's if only Hitler could have had him and Eva taken them to a spa for life, and got them to relax their PTSD and decide to be happy no matter what, and be joyful and and not be angry with anybody, and not go to Paris as a tourist and go to a fashion show without having to steamroll the French people, and enjoy Paris and the perfume and the beauty and so forth. In other words, they're all traumatized, the people who behave like that.
And they're traumatizing other people.
Exactly. And I love that Yuval Harari, in February, when the second invasion of Ukraine started, he was practically crying online, that brilliant guy who gives the history of everything. And he was crying, saying that this is planting more seeds of trauma and bitterness and hatred that will go on for generations. So unnecessary. And he was really weeping. It was he gave a very beautiful thing that time. I really admired that. And I wrote him a note, admiring it. He's a very wonderful genius, and I love him. So that's what we need, these people, And it's really bad when these people get power. It's bad for them, is the point. The systems that let them take power and then spread their trauma like that is really bad for them. They suffer the most.
Yeah.
There is a thing like that. The Buddhists have a view like that. When somebody's murdering a bunch of people, the one that you feel most sorry for is the murderer, actually. Because unless the people are themselves angry and trying to murder them back or something, if the people are just like innocent victims and they're basically good people, then they're going to have a good future situation. And actually, if people really believe that God was omnipotent, any monotheist who believes that, they cannot get into this kind of idea of absolute evil. That's complete. That really is contradictory. That's mentally crippled for them to do that. Because if God is omnipotent, He's responsible for Satan's behavior. He could have put Satan in like finishing school in heaven instead of having Angel Michael and Gabriel cast him down to tempt humans or whatever the stories are, Milton and wherever, Dante. There's no way that an omnipotent deity is going to tolerate some total evil.
Right.
It's not possible.
Yeah. So what does the Dalai Lama say about what will help all that you've mentioned here?
When he arrived in America, finally, when Carter and Cyrus Vance overruled Brzezinski, to give Dalai Lama a visa in 1979, at that moment, Dalai Lama, he announced to the world, I'm not bringing Buddhism here. My religion is kindness, he said. That's my religion. And he believes that he talks about secular ethics. He doesn't demonize the scientists. He thinks I'm a little too harsh with them. And I don't express, I do love them actually too, because they are open, their methodology is open-mindedness and not being dogmatic. But they've been trapped in a little bit of a dogma when they try to get rid of the church and get rid of their faith. And then, because you can't get rid of faith, because human beings have to trust something. So they put that faith in nothingness. And then they've become dogmatic about that. And that's really not scientific. That's scientistic. And that's what I'm against. Not against scientists. I love them, actually. They really learned so many amazing things. And now what they learned is that there's all this dark stuff. They've learned to respect the yin as well as the yang of the universe, And guess what that associates with subliminally? The yin, the feminine. Yes. Yeah. And we're dealing with the disease and the virus of male chauvinist patriarchy and mistreatment of women and disrespect to women and not educating of women and not listening to women. And that's a total virus that we have. And that's also part of the negative. But that isn't Satan. That's our own stupidity. Therefore, I'm so proud of His Holiness, my dear friend, that in his 90th year, he has put whatever little bit of money has accumulated in a trust. He personally is they have vow of poverty as well as celibacy. It's like a Catholic monk. They don't own anything. Like technically, Pope Francis doesn't own the Vatican. He doesn't own the church, this church and that. He's a poverty vowed monk. And the Borgias and those were like mean guys. They were not such good ones back in the old days. But he's really doing it right. And so however, had come his way in the form of book royalties and whatever, managed by his organization, has all been put toward not a bigger temple, not more Buddhism, but toward a secular university in which learning from the character-forming knowledge and methodologies, contemplative methodologies, ethical methodologies, behavioral methodologies of all the world religions will be the core curriculum. So that spirituality, not a particular religion, secular in the sense of, he always makes a big argument. He says he likes the secular word because in India, what secular meant was that the Indian constitution from 1947 was not Hindu, was not Muslim, it was not one religion. It was respectful of all traditions. One of the oldest Judaic communities in the history is in South India. And St. Thomas, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, founded a Christian community that's one of the oldest continuous communities in the world, along with Coptics, in Egypt, They're older than the other Roman one or this or this kind of thing. And they are all in India. So that secular in India doesn't mean disrespect of all religions. It means respect of all religions, separating church and state, in fact. And so there will be, but spirituality can borrow methods from all of them, but each individual keeps their own family tradition and intact, and there's no diminishment of any of the really good love-oriented, long-standing ones. And all of them are love-oriented. Allah al-Rahim, for the Muslims, al-Rahim means the compassionate, and it relates to the Arabic word for the womb, The Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, the word Garbha, which he translates as nature or essence in a male chauvinist form of Buddhism, actually Garbha means a womb. They didn't want the men in the warrior China and warrior Tibet to think that they had a womb somewhere in which a soul, but it's a soul womb. Their spirit grows into an enlightened being. And enlightened doesn't mean some guy with a light bulb in their head. It means someone who is wise and scientific about reality, who's realistic, but also loves everything and loves everyone. That's the same teaching. That's what enlightened means, is that you really feel the love to everyone. You don't just say love everyone. You actually feel it. You appreciate them. You see the beauty of people. Like love is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, we say, right, in English. But that's because the beholder is a loving beholder. So when they love the beloved, they see the beloved as beautiful.
Yeah.
And actually, I believe that beauty from within a person who seems beautiful to others is because they have a loving heart.
Yeah.
That's what makes them beautiful. It isn't a certain specific measure of the cheek and the bow and the eye, this and that, like fashion time. But in a way, it relates to that. And they do have a thing. They have in Buddhist karma, they say that if you're beautiful, like, for example, Emmy is a beautiful person. And if you are, and I used to be semi-handsome when I was younger.
You're still handsome, Bob.
But that was because I was fishing for that. But I was... But that means that you and I were patient in previous lives. We developed in our soul process, we implanted a kind of DNA, or let's call it an SNA, a spirituality, whatever NA stands for.
Nucleic acid, I think.
I see, nucleic acid. So it's soul nucleic acid, but it's a pattern, right? So a soul pattern from having been patient, which means it was the opposite of anger. Because people are ugly, and they want to, like a tiger wants to frighten their victim, right? A cobra, So that's what ugliness is. That's when there's hatred and a wish to destroy, comes through you, and then you show that form. Whereas when you're patient, although you're suffering maybe some annoyingness, but actually you kind of bear with it, and then from that you become tolerant, and then by tolerance you realize that the person harming you is kind of confused and they're suffering worse than you are, putting it at you, and then that gives you some touch of your inner love, which is your actual life force, your health. In Indian medicine, the life force itself is our joy and our health. People who get, for example, I'm not a big fan of grief. People, of course, you don't want to hold trauma in. You have to get rid of it. But people who overdo their grief because they can't face whatever it is, usually because of some guilt, actually, finally, in my opinion. But anyway, when they do that and they smother their own joy, I think they start getting cancerous. Because the joy is where the microbiome feels happy in your stomach, which is the serotonin and everything in the brain. And we're all one huge brain. The whole body is the brain. And the cells hang together and they kick out some cancer cell. They say, take a hike, don't come here, don't grow, don't proliferate. And they tell them that. And a cancer cell is a perfectly nice pink cell, but it grows destroying its host. And the point is that the host won't let it do that as long as the joy is keeping the host energized. They have these wonderful ladies go out in Mumbai and Bombay, and they laugh.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
I've heard of laughing yoga, and I love to laugh.
And everybody laughs. It becomes infectious. And then from the whole neighborhood, like the big building, the co-op or something. They all come out in the street and they laugh for half an hour. Doesn't have a content at first. It's just ha 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 ha. It's
Right.
like, and then they start actually laughing at each other. And this is very healing.
It lifts everybody up, and so it really helps the life force energy, if you will.
Yes, exactly. So that's what we wish for Putin and anybody like him. And we wish for them to actually be happy, and giving them power doesn't make them happy. They still feel like, why do I have to bother with this? Why do I have to worry about that person? Why do I? They don't need another hospital. They don't. If they don't like me, I'm going to conquer them. And then they'll have to, I'm going to close down their TV station. They go like crazy. They go crazy. And they're making more, and yet it's more and more, and they get more and more frustrated because and who do they become most scared of, by the way? Your dictator. What does the dictator become? Who is their biggest fear? Their own bodyguards.
Oh, because I was going to say at a certain point, they don't know who they can trust anymore because people are afraid of them.
Putin in the long table, 40-foot long table, and his own generals are sitting at the other end. It isn't just a virus. He can wear a mask, or they're the ones who would have the proximity to you, and they would have the gun. They could shoot you, if somehow you're not coddling them in the right way. And so you start, if your fear gets stronger and stronger, the more powerful you are, actually. The fear of what others might do to you. And so it's not doing good for them to put them under more stress, is my point. Yeah. It's better to help them to a nice spa in a nice warm climate in Paradise Island. Ricardo Montalban used to have a Paradise Island show where there was a little dwarf who was working with him, and they would, welcome to Paradise Island.
Fantasy Island.
Fantasy, that's it. That was always my fantasy for dictators. That's what we should have.
Yeah.
And or oligarch, internet oligarchs, who otherwise, where do they want to go? To Mars? What are they going to do in Mars? They're going to have French fries with Matt Damon in a Quonset hut. There's no air on Mars. There are no lotuses on Mars. There's no spa on Mars. What are they doing up there? It shows you total traumatized fear of other people to do that. So that's what out of kindness for them, we want them to take a sabbatical and relax and give it up, What do they say in those hip hop things? They say, give it up. And they clap, They give it up.
You were telling us about how the Dalai Lama is taking his own resources to create something special. And I would love to hear what that is. And also, if you could share what his name means, the Dalai Lama.
Well, Dalai means ocean in Mongolian, actually. And the different Dalai Lamas have had a name, Gyatso in Tibetan, Gyatso, which just means a oceanic lake, Gyatso, oceanic water. But the Tibetans never saw an ocean. Well, they have some big lakes, actually, but quite beautiful one. But they never saw the real ocean. The only Tibetans who saw the ocean are the Burmese, who came from Tibet and conquered Burma and got to the beach, that way, warm climate, came out of eastern Tibet. But one Mongol emperor, who the Dalai Lama, the third Dalai Lama went to, I was summoned to, because he thought maybe Dalai Lama was a bigger shaman than his own shamans. And he was, of course, killing a lot of people. Mongolians were very rough when they got into that rough side, And then when he met the 13th Dalai Lama, it was a sort of scene like, you remember the scene in The Lord of the Rings where the human king goes to all those ghost warriors down in the underworld and he brings them up for one last battle. Overwhelm all the orcs. Remember that? And there's very few humans are riding down this hill at the place where the orcs are about to kill the last of the fellows, the ring fellows of the ring, and Gandalf and them. And yet he comes with all these ghost soldiers, So somehow the third Dalai Lama, something about his field, his spiritual field, maybe the angels with him, whatever it was, it is said that when that Mongol king met him, he felt like he felt an oceanic presence.
Mm.
He said, "Oh, this is a Dalai Lama." Lama just means like a teacher or guru, and then he followed his. Actually, it's a very dramatic story. At the time, he had bad gout. That Altan Khan was his name, the Golden King, Emperor, and he had bad gout and pain in his feet. And one of the Mongolian shamanistic cures for that, as a palliative, was to slaughter a mare horse and put your feet in the warm innards of the horse, belly of the horse. So he caught the emperor in a somewhat embarrassing position. Normal people sitting on his throne with his feet inside the belly of a slaughtered mare. He did, and he said, "Oh, but somehow, because he didn't hate the guy, even though he was a killer, but he was an emperor. Something about that person felt that he was totally accepted just as he was, as mystics feel when they meet Jesus or when they meet Krishna. This is a love that is unconditional, and that whatever my failings are, my sins, whatever it is, and that guy had a lot of them." And he was sitting on top of a dead horse, and so he then said, "He's a Dalai," and then. Well, if you think that, I'll tell you, you will get better in your gout and you'll be much happier if you stop doing animal sacrifice in your ritual and you stop even doing human sacrifice of your enemies. He said, when you conquer people, the Mongolians would even do that at that time. And immediately all of the sacrificial posts, mostly animals, sacrificial posts in the whole vast nation of his whole, tent city, they had these giant tent cities, the Mongolian horde, and because they lived with their animals and their horses and so on, and they all burned a giant fire, they burned so they all gave up on the order of the Khan, top down kindness to at least the animals. and actually, that is a wonderful achievement of the Tibetans. Actually, in history, we are taught. In our Pentagon budget-dominated society, which is good. Actually, Dalai Lama likes that because at least we have the flame of freedom and democracy, although we don't practice it that well. But we have the ideal, and that's unique, actually, at the moment, pretty much. I mean, and the European Union has followed us, Australia, Japan. It's good to be defeated by us because we then encourage them to do that, even though we're not doing it that well. We instead of occupying them and squeezing the marrow out of them. And we try anyway. That's our exceptionalism. Otherwise we also have been very vicious in our past, and we have to face those sins somehow. We do, and it's good for us. And we can then never mind. So the whole vast Mongolian Empire was still vast in the 1500s, and they had left main downtown China. They had left downtown Vienna and Istanbul and Baghdad. They conquered all of the Muslim lands at one point. But they still were very powerful, controlling really what is now called Russia, which is not really Russia. It's an empire of 32 countries. Even the Federation has 32. And if you add Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine that broke away, it was a 35 or 6 or 7 before. It was a Russian empire. But we always think of it as Russia because it wasn't like Britain and France that there's an overseas thing to it because it's land, But those people in Yakutia, in Siberia, they don't like the white Russians who are in Moscovia. It's a European country, really, a little bigger than Greater Germany. If around 100 million, and they would be around 150 million. That would be it. There would not be 240 million that they suppose there. Those are all non-Russian people, like Chechens and Mongolians. They don't want to be under Russia. They would like to have their own regional. Then they would federate economically. That would be fine. And that's what Yeltsin tried in Gorbachev. And they could elect their own governors and have their own local government. And then Putin immediately undid that, and he appointed all the governors, and he tried to reassert the imperial. That's what he's been doing. He said we got stuck on the Russian Empire sort of thing. Third effort at a Russian empire, but it's too late for empires in history. We're not going to be having them. We're not, New York is not going to really own New Jersey. If Kentucky wants to be free, they can.
Yeah.
That's all. They don't want to be bossed around by California. That's fine. They have to get their own act together and their own economy together because they get a $40 billion subsidy from New York and California every year.
Yeah.
They do. And so they can't just sit there in their sort of old-fashioned ways, their caste divisions. His university is going to be a spirituality central, as a secular university with all the sciences and psychologies and all the technologies, and AI will behave and AI will be helping. The problem with AI, why people are scared of it, is because it's MI. It's actually MMI, not really AI. The first M stands for macho, male chauvinist, which is the majority of the computer people. And then the second M stands for materialist. So macho materialist intelligence being magnified. You could even add a third M, magnifying macho materialism and calculating how to conquer everything, and dominate it all out of a paranoia that you can't just love it. And so what it needs as an antidote is FI, female intelligence, woman or WI, with woman's intelligence, and LI, love intelligence, and interdependent intelligence, and interconnected intelligence. And therefore, all the spiritual scriptures of Judaism, the Torah, the New Testament, and all the apocryphal 8 Gospels that Constantine banished, Thomas, and etc. All Mary, yes. And all of them have to be programmed in there. Love your enemy. I mean, love your enemy. Love your neighbor as yourself. Even love your enemy. That all has to be programmed in there. And then that will help form character. So the whole burden is not on mom anymore, and on the baby, and then from kindergarten on, people have to be, character has to be formed to be cooperative and friendly and not a bully and loving and happy and cheerful and self-restrained about temper tantrums and things, and learn to use, be competitive, to put that acidic energy, the male, macho energy into running or high jumping or something, but not on beating other people up. Maybe we would stop prize fighting, we would maybe do martial arts, where you're a little more like a dance, And there'd be a certain amount of that. You can't avoid it, but not the brutality part, no. And then around that, whatever we have at Harvard, Oxford, University of Siena in Italy, Moscow University before the latest round, where they completely destroyed, the Communist Party, the FSB, the rebirth of the KGB, has destroyed the Russian Academy of Arts and Sciences. They moved them to a Quonset hut out somewhere, and they put one of their oligarch banks in the great, beautiful Moscow Arts and Sciences building. So they really destroyed Russia, actually. They are destroying Russia, not just Ukraine and Chechnya and other places, Russia itself. And that kind of form of system where a crazed PTSD victim is put in power over other PTSD and selects all kinds of other PTSD victims. And they wreck everything. We can't do that now. The planet, Mother Earth doesn't want it. She won't accept it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this university that the Dalai Lama and you and others are creating? It sounds like you would be inviting other leaders of, sounds like science, spirituality, religion.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And Pope Francis should come to the inauguration. It should be open soon enough. He's elderly, I know, but Dalai Lama is too. And my dear friend Archpatriarch Bartholomew of Eastern Orthodoxy must come. All kind of Protestant ministers. What's his name? The guy in California who was in the Clinton inauguration. What was his name? He's behaving badly with gay people in Africa, but otherwise he's a funny guy. Has a big mega church in California. He wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. Those kind of big ministers, they have to come. And they have to stop, and all of them Michael Beckwith, and all these great people.
Yeah.
And then from Christianity, and then the Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar University, and then the guy in Qom, not the silly one who tries to be the dictator of Iran, but the one in Qom who is really head of the Shiites. That nice old one there, he's a very nice one there actually, who is against all this violence, and he doesn't want to be like under the Iranian guy. I forgot his name, but he's really good old guy in Qom in Iraq, which is the head of the Shiites. And they're not really that much against the Sunni. They don't have to be. And they all come, and MBS will come. And he will bring some head mufti of Saudi also. And there'll be a little moderate there, Wahhabi thing, And they'll all come. And then they will create an education system where it will be part of getting your bachelor degree to be spiritually open-minded, as well as devoted to whatever your own grandma's faith and religion was. And no longer are you saying that our omnipotent God wants us to go out in his name and conquer some people who don't really puja to him or her. And therefore he wants them all, you have to force it because his omnipotence is not enough without you. That's ridiculous. You don't have to do that. He can teach them through Buddhism. He can teach them through Hinduism. He can teach them through Jainism. He can teach them through Judaism, whatever it is. He's always working. If he's truly omnipotent, don't you pretend you're omnipotent. And be kind and loving, like he told you to be. Thou shalt not kill. That's what he told you. That's the Dalai Lama's dream, is that university. And actually the Nalanda University that the Buddhists created in India a long time ago, that lasted up until 1172 when it was burned by an invader, burned down, and its huge library was burned. And the contents of its libraries are pretty much only existed in Tibetan translations, actually. And that's been my work, has been translating that. And I was given an award by the President of India for doing that, bringing back their own heritage in that way from the Tibetan language. Very little. Dalai Lama told me it will take 3 generations. Actually, he told the President of Columbia University that it would. I needed 3 lifetimes to finish the project, and then the president said he was sorry, but they didn't have a reincarnation system at Columbia. But actually, we have an endowment at Columbia that I helped create, which should put a person with the same scholastic abilities as me, which there's plenty of them, to continue that for 3 generations. In collaboration with other people. So that's what he was doing, His Holiness. And that's what we should all be helping him to do. And I want to help him to do that. And we have our little Tibet house here in New York, and we want to help him do that. And there's a great Tibet house in New Delhi. They want to help him do that. And it will really be terrific, I think. And I expect, I want MBS. I want him to show up and to atone for his sins and support that. I do. I want him to fix Saudi Arabia from being like that, from the Wahhabi extremism, it should be a nice, open-minded Islam, which it does exist, and it is a beautiful thing. It's really the same as Judaism and Christianity. They're all really one thing. And they're all really the same as all the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Taoists. Human beings, they are loving creatures. We are, as opposed to rhinoceroses and tigers and things. We are gentle and loving. We have these beautiful women who create babies. As Mark Epstein, my friend, said, they can take tuna fish sandwiches, and then they can create a baby. They are like super AI, super creative. That is, create a magnificent thing that is a human being.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And they need to be respected and well paid for it. Marilyn Waring is the person I would recommend to everyone. She's a New Zealand sociologist, professor. She wrote a book called Counting for Nothing, The Labor of Women, which is a global thing about the male chauvinism and how the key labor for human life, which is done by women, is completely unsalaried and unpaid and abused and exploited. And the cover of her paperback is marvelous. She's standing there with a short haircut, looking kind of severe, somber, and there's a tank behind her with a giant cannon coming over her shoulder. It's marvelous, really.
And humans have become tribal in their belief systems of my belief is better or superior than yours,
That's
you're
right.
different. And
That's right.
what you and the Dalai Lama are suggesting and have been for decades and is to like you say, love each other, be kind to each other. But I can imagine people listening might be thinking, and I know you co-authored a book with, is it Sharon Salzberg?
Yes, love your enemy.
Love your enemy. And I think that a lot of people can be very challenged by that because they can feel that somebody really harmed them. So how can we love each other?
That's the advantage that the religious people have over the secular ones, which is that the religious people in the planet believe in future life in some form. They deny reincarnation as a human or even an animal or even in hell or something, but they at least have at least one future life. Mm-hmm. I made that fundamentalist guy that I mentioned, the big church guy, mega church Protestant guy. I made him really laugh when I said they were great in having a future life like the Buddhists, and we loved them because even though they had only one, it was really long. And he just completely burst out laughing. He was so amused by that. So, in other words, Dante will be eternally in heaven with Beatrice if she'll accept him, which is not for sure for at all because he behaved badly in life. But anyway, if she does, he will be there eternally. And then they have this really silly idea that you're going to be eternally in hell if you were a bad moneylender for Florence or something. But that's neither of those are going to happen. Mm-hmm. But the point is, the one eternal thing is if you become really unified with love yourself. You develop the wisdom to know that the only way to be is the way God is, and love everybody as God does. And if you have you can through even the monotheistic traditions. If God is omnipotent, he also can share his omnipotence. You can't say what he can do, and you're always going to have to be inferior to him. No way. He didn't say that. And if he's omnipotent, there's nothing stops him from saying that he wants everyone to be like himself. Mm-hmm. So everyone is like himself. But then people say, but he couldn't be omnipotent. But that's because the kings got in there, and they don't want anybody equaling their power. Mm-hmm. They want to be higher than other people. They want to be above the law. They don't want to be equal to their subjects. And they have been doing that for thousands of years, not just today. But at any time, especially now, we cannot tolerate that anymore. We will not tolerate it. And we will definitely not do so if we have the choice. And we do have the choice, actually.
It's up to each of us individuals to make those choices on our relationship, not only with others, but also with ourselves, because it seems that how we feel about ourselves, our thoughts and beliefs can greatly impact, directly, perhaps even mirror how we perceive and treat others.
Exactly. And then this is my key advice to everybody. And I would say Dalai Lama's key advice. And I think all spiritual teachers' key advice, basically, it is, don't believe anyone who tells you have no power. Because when they do that, they're telling you have no responsibility also. Mm-hmm. And they take responsibility. But that's fake, because if they're human beings like you, they cannot take responsibility for you. They will dump you in a minute. They don't have the ability to do it. But you actually do have power. Everyone does. And they have responsibility, therefore. So they will be responsible for what they choose. They can't say, I did it because so-and-so told me to do it. They cannot say that. They are going to be responsible for what they do. And that's because that is their spark of omnipotence. That's the little spark of omnipotence that omnipotent God gives them, is that they can make a choice and be responsible for what they choose.
Yes. And that's karma in a nutshell.
That's right. So don't pay your child support. Pay for your neighbor if you have to. You're responsible. You are. You live next door.
Help each other. My husband is a chef who actually went to the Culinary Institute of America, where you're located right now in New York, many years ago in Hyde Park.
Oh, how wonderful!
Yes,
Lucky you.
Yes, I am very blessed in this area. Yes, we have beautiful food. And I asked him if he would have any question for the Dalai Lama, what would he ask? And he wanted to know what his favorite food is and his least favorite. And I was wondering if you can share any memorable meals you two have had together.
Yeah, well, I think Dalai Lama's favorite food, it might be tsampa, which was the first thing that made me have a visceral memory of a previous life. And tsampa is roasted barley flour. You roast the barley seeds, and then you, with not the husk outside part of the seed, but still a little bit of a seed. You roast it in the seed form, and then you grind that up into a flour, fairly coarse flour, and then you use butter tea, salty and butter tea, very sweet butter tea, not sour like they think it is, salty tea, and you put that in the thing and make little bowls out of it. In your like eating muesli or something, but it's a powder, and it has that roasted flavor to it, and it's barley, high altitude barley, and then you taste it, and it tastes just like Cheerios, like the old Cheerios. And when I was a little kid, I would not eat Rice Krispies if I could avoid it. I would not eat cornflakes if I could avoid it. I only would eat Cheerios. And my parents would try to get me Cheerios. They didn't manage to deliver every time, but I would make a fuss unless I got Cheerios. And then when I finally in Dharamsala in 1964, I had a bite of tsampa. Oh, that's my Cheerios. There's my Cheerios. I realized I was a Zampa eater, and Tibetans call themselves the Zampa eaters. And they, when they go on long caravans or things, because they're semi-nomadics. I mean, they have also farmers. They're not all nomadic, but semi-nomadic, and they carry big bags of them, and then they just boil some water and they make a tea, and then they put it in the Zampa, and then that's their staple. They do eat meat also, because there's nomads. The yaks make it livable, that plateau. They eat, but they're very, like the Maasai, they cherish their animal, but then when it gets old, they don't waste it, But they don't like feedlot like level with that yaks. They don't, So Dalai Lama, as a Tibetan, he might unfortunately like the taste of meat, but he tries to be vegetarian. He was vegetarian for a few years when he first came to India with the plenitude of vegetables that they have and the great spicing. But then we got the Tibetans. He doesn't officially proclaim himself a vegetarian because Tibetans get frightened. They think he'll die if he doesn't eat meat. Because as nomads, they have this tendency. So he might also like good steak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he generally eats, maybe he might eat a noodle soup with a little bit of meat broth, a little bit now and then. He doesn't normally eat steak. They don't eat steaks, because they respect it too much. They might have like yak prosciutto in Tibet. They might have had thin sliced, freeze dried or solar dried, yak meat. Because once a yak gets killed, then they keep it for weeks and months by curing it, smoking it. But Zampa is their main thing. He has all the monks in India. They can't get food. They can't get meat in the monastery. He conceded that to the Hindu spiritual people who live around the monasteries, the big rebuilt monasteries in India. And he doesn't serve meat. They have no meat market at the monastery. But if a monk wants to take a taxi, if they have a little change, and go into McDonald's in Mysore City, they're not punished or anything. Because that is a Tibetan sort of national characteristic, unfortunately. If the Dalai Lama was younger and he came here and your husband made a beautiful, actually they like that from Chinese. Taipei, and I recommend your husband as a chef, study that.
He was just in Taipei a year ago.
Taipei, they have the most amazing food. That is what we would really defend in Taipei if they invaded. Not for the computer chip maker, but for the restaurants, because they make roast beef out of mushrooms that you couldn't tell the difference if you are someone who has an affinity for a little bit of steak. It's so delicious, but it is really mushrooms. But
Right.
the secrets of how they manage the fungal culture of the mushroom, and then how they prepare it, it's amazing, actually. And I went last time I went visited Taiwan. One of my graduate students who had done research there knew Chinese well. He looks at me and goes, Taipei. I said, oh, what? You don't want me to go to Taipei? He says, no. He says, I want to go with you. I say, why? He says, the food.
Yes. My husband actually just went on a trip there last year and just raved about it. Yes, and loved it.
Oh, anyway, Dalai Lama would love that. And you know what? In that university, there will be a culinary school. What is this crap? At Harvard, they should teach cooking.
Yes.
To men also, not just to women. And everyone should learn to cook.
Yeah.
I once told the president of Amherst College that the local tradespeople were a little bit ripping the college off in some repairs they were doing. They were doing unnecessary level, and they were because I'm a builder. I built my own house and so on. And he said, oh, we don't mind. They do maybe a little exaggerate a little their billing, but to invoices, but we don't mind. We want to keep good relations with the community, blah, blah, blah. And then the rest of that evening was a reception for the faculty. He went around, and he happened to have a white shirt over his blue blazer. And he kept tugging on the white cuff of the shirt when we would be nearby each other, in a reception. He would tug the white thing. He didn't tug the collar. But he tugged the white, like, we're white-collar people. But that's wrong. Every college person should respect an electrician and a plumber, and they should know how to do it. And, they can then go in their office and push papers and act like a desk jockey and whatever, but they will not act like there's a caste system and that, somehow everybody has to just read papers and look at screens. That's wrong. There's beauty in every profession, and there's respect, and they should all be very well paid and have a good life out of whatever they do, and pride in their work.
Definitely.
And therefore, people in supposed elite colleges and universities and even high schools should learn how life is put together.
Right.
Women and men.
Definitely.
Remember Rosie the Riveter during the World War?
Yes.
That was a big step for feminism, actually, that they needed her to make the tank or the aircraft.
Yeah.
And then they respected the woman to be able to rivet the bolts into the skin of the thing.
Definitely.
It helped. Not that everyone should only do that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying everybody should know a little bit. Everybody should be a polymath to some degree, even though they will pick something that they love to do, and they will follow their bliss, in the famous words of Joseph Campbell.
Definitely.
And the profession will be work will be a joy to them.
Yes. Bob, is there anything else you want to share today about your good friend, the Dalai Lama?
I want some oligarchs maybe to support the university. And, the greatest thing about having lots of billions is giving it away. Not running away and hiding in Mars, but giving it to spirituality, especially spirituality things, and to remediate poverty and to equalize life, social systems and so forth. Not to remove the creativity of individuals, but to make everyone live free and therefore have their own creativity. And then things will be invented and things will be beautiful that we can't even imagine. Mm-hmm. Like this, I'm looking across the Eastern River here in New York City at these boring buildings. And I know architects have designs of like 80, 60-story or 40-story building, like I see there with a glass surface, built on petroleum because they have a heating system that will heat up all this thermopane glass. But even thermopane, you can't heat it enough. And I have seen architects who have buildings where you have plants growing on the 25th floor and an open air thing in the building. And they'll have solar things all over the building. And they'll have water flowing from the top in beautiful waterfalls and pools dripping down in a nice way. And so it can be natural beauty in a little bit of land, And they can even produce food and grow mushrooms in the cellar. I mean, what's wrong with them? And they have these plastic boxes and people are supposed to fit in the box. And then what? They're going to plug in and they're going to put some computer in the brain and then they're going to own their brain like the Matrix? Come on. This is stupid. And therefore, everyone should know something about architecture. You know, this computer science person should know about architecture and engineering. Those are arts. Engineering is an art. Computer science is an art. AI should be artificial, should be artful. Like the intelligence of an artist, creating beauty because of loving things, seeing beauty in some metallic thing.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to encourage all of our listeners to also explore the book that you co-authored about the Dalai Lama, Man of Peace.
Oh, yes. The illustrated biography of the Dalai Lama of Tibet. This is the full title. It has a endorsement from Bishop Tutu, and who was a deep friend of the Dalai Lama. They were really good friends. And he promised to put in a word for the Dalai Lama that he shouldn't have to go to hell because he's not a Christian.
What do the Tibetans think about hell, Bob?
He loves them. Dalai Lama promised to go help anybody in hell get out of there. You know, that's the vow of the Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Buddha of compassion. You know. So anyway, that's really great. So anyway, thank you so much. And My Wisdom is Bliss is a great fun book, and Why the Dalai Lama Matters is a fun book. And let's do it, and let's change education. We can see from all these problems that happened over October 7th. By the way, October 7th, people should know it was Putin's birthday. And therefore, the attack on the Israelis, the merciless, horrendous terrorist attack on the Israelis at the peace dance they were having in southern Israel, and all the local Israelis who live near Gaza are the ones who are nice to the Palestinians, because that's why they live near there, and they got killed. It was horrible, but that was a birthday present by the stupid Ayatollah of Iran to Putin, his ally, because he wants nuclear weapons from Russia. You know, he does. That axis of evil is doing that, and he wants that, so he gave him a birthday present on his birthday, October 7th, which took the heat off him in Ukraine to have this whole disaster in Israel and Gaza and Palestine. Terrible. And Lebanon. And now maybe Iran itself. I mean, it's just awful. But people should know that it's his birthday. People should know about reality. That's very key. Spirituality is not some la-la stuff just off there and we can ignore everything else because we're all spiritual. No. Spirituality is loving everything on the street.
Yes.
And loving everything at all times. Okay,
Yes.
so thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.
I love talking with you. And as my wife says, I love just talking.
Oh, well, I love talking with you, Bob.
And so and she has told me you're also my guru. So, but if you have anything to tell me, I'm ready to listen.
Oh, if I do?
Yes.
Oh, well, I just want to tell you that I love talking with you, and I know you have so much to share. And those listening, I just want to suggest that you are very close with the Dalai Lama, and a lot of what you are sharing sounds like it's really his thoughts as well. Is that true to a certain degree?
We disagree a little bit. Like, he's nicer than me. And he's more polite, usually. Occasionally he's naughty. But he likes to he's a little mischievous, let's say. He can be, but he's nicer. And I'm a little still, whatever, waspy, wasp with a B, Although I do love Jesus, I could be a wasp even. I love Jesus. I'm not a big fanatic Protestant, and I like Catholicism. I prefer it in one way among Christian forms, because they have monasticism. And I think that's very important for some people. In addition to being a population control institution and an anti-militarism institution. Some people who end up in the military and get all PTSD, they could be rather taking their anger out in their meditation and making some champagne or jelly in the kitchen or something, and praying to overcome their anger to the angels in a monastery. And I believe it is the original anti-militarism institution is monasticism, and it's in that sense important. Some
Talked
women
about
who don't want to have to do the childbearing business in this life, and therefore being celibate is good for them, and they like it. It isn't a loss for them. They can have an inner bliss themselves without it, without sexuality, without habitual sexuality, the ordinary sexuality and the partnering sexuality, and that's very fine for them. So I don't like that Protestantism thinks it's very triumphalist about how they got rid of monasticism because you can't perfect yourself. But actually, education is how to develop and perfect yourself. So just because Luther kept meeting Satan in the toilet is not a reason to make that a big triumph. What it immediately did was it created a population surplus in Europe of extra people, and they went out and conquered everything. They genocided the Native Americans. They killed a lot of people in Africa and Asia, and they then had huge wars with each other because they weren't taking people out of the reproduction pool. They take a 20% or 10% out of that pool, and that's what keeps you more balanced in population. So that's an initial benefit of it. And then it takes some sort of macho type people who don't relate well to the other sex, puts them in a situation where they just have to control themselves, and that's good. And then the creative energies can flow into wonderful things that celibate people can do if they know how to sublimate, which they
right.
So I love that.
Well, Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you for being a good Catholic, and for I hope you have read, but since for talking with me a few times, James Carroll's book called "The Church and the Jews," Constantine's sword. The Church and the Jews. He's a former Jesuit. He's still a very devoted Catholic, but no longer a Jesuit. He's a journalist, actually. Or if he's still, I don't know if he's alive, but I think he is. But he wrote a brilliant book. And because we really have to reconcile with the Jews. Christians have to really face the fact that what they believe is an omnipotent deity decided to have only one child. And he happened to want to have him be male and happened to want to have him be Jewish. So that was not a message to people to dislike Jews.
Yeah, I know it is like a head scratcher on that one.
It doesn't make sense to then dislike them.
No, it doesn't.
Because God picked them.
Yeah.
A lot of language about Israel in there. And, the Jews are just as Christian as the Christians. And the Christians are just as Jewish as the Jews, and they should overcome their Christ killer nonsense. The Romans killed Christ, not the Jews. The Jews were dominated by the Romans at that time, and the Romans were imperialists. Okay, and we don't like Italian imperialists. Il Duce, Mussolini, we didn't like. We like Italian fashion, Italian cars, Italian people, yes. We don't like emperors and mafias. No, we don't.
Bob, thank you for all that you've shared here today. I know we could talk about so much more about your relationship with the Dalai Lama. And also you bring such a unique perspective, having taught world religion at Columbia for 50 years. And I do hope that we can have more conversations on New Thinking Aloud.
I love it. I love talking with you.
Great.
And you've talked with so many people. You have also wonderful. That's like a curriculum for you. It's like your education too. It's really
You're
great.
right.
I'm grateful to have a front row seat with you and share it with everybody. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Okay, all the best.
Great.
See you again, I hope, Amy. Lots of love.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Absolutely. I always say my students.
Book
3 in the new Thinking Aloud Dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.